Hi, I'm Anthea. At my sister's engagement party, surrounded by champagne flutes and family smiles, she looked me dead in the eye and called me the source of bitterness and negativity. Then she had security walk me out. No warning, no explanation, just years of unspoken resentment turned public humiliation. But what if I told you that moment wasn't the betrayal? It was just the unveiling. The real damage had started long before, quiet, patient, almost invisible. Until I uncovered the truth they thought they'd buried for good. It was the kind of spring night Savannah is known for. Soft breezes carrying the scent of wisteria, the low hum of crickets in the distance, and the sky painted in shades of deep blue and amber. I parked 2 blocks away from the historic waterfront mansion Sterling had rented for her engagement party. I sat in the car for a few minutes longer than I should have, hands locked on the steering wheel, heart thudding like a drum in my chest. The house glowed like a movie set, white pillars, wraparound porch, string lights swaying gently from the oak trees above. I told myself it would be different this time. Maybe she'd smile when she saw me. Maybe, after years of being the quiet supporter, the one behind the scenes, she'd finally acknowledge me as her sister. Just once. Inside, the party was already in full swing. Music floated through the air, something classical with a modern twist, and the place smelled of lavender polish and shrimp cocktail. I passed through the grand entrance, my heels clicking against the marble floor. People I hadn't seen in a decade were milling about with drinks in hand, dressed in pastel silks and linen suits. I spotted our father, Arthur, near the bar, ramrod straight as always, eyes scanning the room like a security guard rather than a parent. When he noticed me, he offered a polite nod. No warmth, no smile. Just acknowledgement. By the guest book table were stacks of glossy, cream-colored programs. I picked one up. The title read, Sterling Damien, A Celebration of Love. I flipped through it quickly, scanning the list of core wedding team. Her best friend, her college roommate. Even her hairdresser had a line of thanks. But not me, not a single mention. My throat tightened. A young woman with a clipboard and headset approached. Hi, are you looking for your seat? I gave her my name. Her eyes flicked over her list, then landed on something near the bottom. Ah, here we go. You're in Section D, back there, near the service entrance. She led me past rows of tables lit by candlelight, past clinking champagne flutes and polite laughter. My table was a tiny two-top squeezed against the far wall beside the swinging kitchen doors. Every time they opened, I got a burst of hot garlic air and the crash of dishes. I could see the center stage from there, but just barely. It felt like watching someone else's celebration through a glass pane. The servers didn't stop at my table. When I tried to wave one down, he apologized, said this section was non-service. I folded my hands in my lap, the way Mom taught me when I was 10, and invisible even then. Across the room, Sterling stood in a golden spotlight, surrounded by camera flashes and adoration. She looked flawless in her white silk gown, hair curled, lashes long, every inch the star of the show. She laughed easily, tossed her head, reached out to touch Damien's arm like it was second nature. I watched her, and for a moment, I was proud. Despite everything, I was proud. Then she stepped up onto the stage. The room quieted as she took the microphone. The string quartet behind her fell into a hush. She smiled that practiced smile, the one she used in her YouTube videos. I just want to thank everyone who made tonight so magical, she began. You've all supported me through everything. The ups, the downs, the reinvention of myself. I sat up straighter, a flicker of hope stirring. And of course, she continued, we all have people in our lives who don't support us. People who live in shadows, who let bitterness eat away at joy. The audience chuckled, unsure. Sterling didn't break eye contact with me. But tonight, I'm choosing peace over negativity. Then she said it. Anthea, please leave. Silence slammed down like a hammer. Even the servers stopped. I heard a gasp near the bar. Someone dropped a fork. Sterling's voice had been calm, almost sweet, but every eye in the room turned to me like I was a virus exposed. I stood slowly, hands trembling, the scrape of my chair echoing too loud in the stunned stillness. I caught Arthur's eye. He looked away, pretending to sip his drink. The string quartet sat frozen. A cameraman beside the dance floor lowered his lens. I didn't cry. I didn't scream or cause a scene. That would have given her exactly what she wanted. Instead, I reached for my clutch, adjusted the strap on my shoulder, and walked. I walked past the silent tables, past the floral arches Sterling and I had once dreamed about as little girls, past the carefully curated spotlight she lived in now. The kitchen doors opened one last time, and I slipped through the crowd and into the cooler night. The air hit my face like a wave. I gripped the porch railing, heart pounding, trying to breathe. Inside, the music slowly resumed. Laughter returned like a tide, like nothing had happened. I thought of everything I had done for her, loaning her money when her bank account was down to $3.21, editing her earliest videos, staying up late to help her prep for auditions, sharing contacts, and sending job listings she never replied to. I had handed her bricks, one by one, and she had built a palace on top of them. And then she had used that palace to push me out. I walked back to my car slowly, heels crunching on gravel like old bones snapping. The mansion glowed behind me, warm and golden, and I felt like I'd been thrown out of a painting I had helped create. I unlocked the car, sat behind the wheel, and looked one last time at the house. At her. At the life I used to be part of. And for the first time, I realized how effortless it had been for her to erase me. The moment I stepped out into the night, the air clung to my skin, cold, hollow, unforgiving. The glass door whispered shut behind me with a soft click, muffling the sound of clinking glasses and polite laughter still echoing from inside. I stood still for a second, staring at the night, letting the silence wrap itself around me like a shroud. No footsteps followed, not Arthur's, not Sterling's. No one even noticed I had left. I lingered near the valet stand, pretending I had a destination. The lanterns above buzzed faintly, casting yellow halos on the pavement. Cars rolled by, headlights sweeping the drive, but my own mind stayed still, frozen, trying to make sense of the past 20 minutes. I could still feel the heat in my cheeks, still hear the way Sterling's voice cut through the air like crystal, her toast, her words, that smile that masked the dagger. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering above the rideshare app. Home was pre-selected, but I didn't press it. I didn't know where home was anymore. My contacts list stared back at me. My instinct was to call Celine, but I hesitated. I didn't want to cry, not yet, not until I understood what just happened. And then the screen lit up. A message from Marisol. "You were really out of line tonight. That video was intense." My chest tightened. Video? I hadn't seen any video. I typed back quickly. "What video?" Her reply came seconds later. "The one they showed during the toast. It's all over. People are sharing it already." "Sorry, Anthea." A sharp jolt went through me. I felt like I'd missed a step on the stairs. Sterling hadn't just made a scene. She had made a spectacle. Hands shaking, I opened the party's event app. Sterling had promoted it earlier in the week, complete with a schedule, RSVP list, even a media tab. I navigated to replay. There it was. Sterling's toast. I pressed play. At first, it seemed like a typical party video, polished lighting, laughter, Sterling glowing in that silver gown. Then came the cut. The screen filled with a close-up of me, mid-conversation, taken from an odd angle. My mouth was moving, my eyebrows knit in what looked like anger. The audio clipped in, "Just don't let her get hurt." Then another cut. The tone shifted. My voice again, but the inflection was off. Snippets pulled from who knows where, layered between dramatic pauses, tension-building music, even faded-out shots of me shaking my head or narrowing my eyes. A murmur rolled through the background, as if the room had been cued to gasp. But it wasn't real. It was edited, crafted. My words, ripped from private phone calls, maybe even voice notes, twisted into something cruel. I wasn't concerned or protective in this version. I was bitter, envious, cold. They made me the villain of her story. I closed the video, bile rising in my throat. My hands felt numb. I sat down on the edge of the curb, not caring about the wetness seeping through my skirt. A gust of wind scattered leaves across the drive. I was still staring at the screen when more messages came in. Wow, that was harsh. Sterling deserved better tonight. You've always been like this, haven't you? My mouth went dry. The betrayal wasn't just on a screen, it was spreading. I opened my camera roll. My finger slid across old photos. There I was, helping Sterling draft her first sponsorship pitch. There I was, backstage at her launch event, holding up cue cards. There I was, photoshopping her headshots while she texted some guy in the background. All those moments I gave her, all the pieces of myself I offered to build her dream. She had taken every one of those and flipped the narrative. I stood up slowly, my knees stiff, my chest burning. Across the street, Sterling's house glowed, warm and welcoming to everyone but me. It was a fortress now. A shrine to her version of events. My phone buzzed again. I ignored it. Instead, I found Celine's name and dialed. She picked up on the second ring. Anthea? I couldn't keep the tremble from my voice. Did you see the clip? She was quiet for a beat. Then, yes, I did. It's not what you said, Anthea. She spliced it together. She made you look awful. That wasn't the conversation we had. I never gave permission, I whispered. She didn't need it, Celine said. Not technically, but morally, it's disgusting. She made it sound like you were attacking her when all you did was care. A long silence stretched between us. The noise of traffic in the distance grew louder, or maybe it was just my ears ringing. My thoughts were muddy, but one thing became clear. This hadn't been impulsive. Sterling hadn't just reacted, she had planned it. She edited that video, scripted it, curated every second for effect. It was an execution. Not just of my reputation, but of my role in her life. I wasn't just the sister who fell out of favor. I was now the obstacle in her fairy tale, the warning not to be like me. Celine's voice was soft. What are you going to do? I swallowed. I don't know. But I'm not going to let this stand. The call ended. I stared up at the sky. Blank, starless, indifferent. The chill seeped through my coat, but I didn't care. This wasn't just about a video. This was about how easy it had been for her to erase me, replace me with a version that suited her narrative. Sterling had turned our shared history into a script where she got to play the wounded heroine, and I was cast as the bitter shadow in the wings. But I wasn't going to play that role, not anymore. I walked to my car, opened the door, and sat behind the wheel without starting it. Across the street, the party continued. Sterling's laughter floated faintly through the air, a high note in a low symphony. I stared at the house, at the lives inside that had already moved on without me, and I whispered to no one. They didn't just cut me out. They rewrote me. But I was still here, and I had my own story to tell. Even before I turned the key in the ignition, a strange ache settled deep inside my chest. It wasn't sharp, just dull and familiar, like an old bruise you forget until something brushes against it. I sat in my parked car for a moment, engine humming low, headlights catching on the leaves dancing across the pavement. From across the street, the glow of Sterling's engagement party lingered in the windows, warm and golden, like a hearth I hadn't been invited to. That house. Our house, or at least that's what I used to tell myself. Back when family meant unity and promises were handshakes, not loopholes. Now it stood there gleaming like something from a magazine, bathed in string lights and catered laughter. I could still hear the clink of champagne glasses, still feel the sting of Sterling's toast echoing in my ears. To new beginnings, she had said, eyes flitting across the room without ever landing on me. No thank you. No acknowledgement. Just a clean public sweep, like I was never part of any of it. I backed out of the neighborhood slowly, as if any sudden move might break me completely. The streets of Savannah whispered with the hush of midnight, lined with magnolia trees and ghosts of our childhood. I passed houses I once roller-skated past, corners where Sterling and I used to wait for the ice cream truck. It all felt too tender now. I tried not to linger. By the time I pulled into my apartment driveway, the silence had thickened. I didn't get out right away. Just sat there, fingers curled around the steering wheel, heart beating like a slow drum. My phone lit up on the passenger seat. A notification from Celine, one of the few people I still trusted. "I saw your post. Be careful." I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I opened the real estate app I hadn't touched in months, thumb hovering before I typed in the address. Sterling White. That's what it said on the deed. Sole owner. No mention of me, of the loan I gave her, of the nights I stayed up drafting the remodeling proposal, building the brand deck she now flaunted like her own. My name didn't exist in that structure, and yet I could trace its foundation with my soul. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. She hadn't just thrown a party in that house, she'd rewritten history in it. 2 years ago, Sterling had come to me with her world falling apart. She'd lost her job. Her savings had evaporated in a failed business pivot. I was juggling 2 side hustles and teaching part-time, but still, I gave. Because that's what sisters do. We don't measure help in percentages or legal agreements. We give out of love, out of hope, out of a stupid, stubborn belief that loyalty still meant something. "I just need your name off the title for now," she had told me, stirring her coffee nervously. "The bank's being weird with my self-employed income. It's just temporary, I promise." "We'll fix it later." I nodded then. Even smiled, because I believed her. Now, I reached into the glove box and pulled out the old envelope I'd almost forgotten I kept. Inside were photocopies of checks, screenshots of bank transfers, an email thread about contractor quotes, and in her handwriting, barely legible from hurried pen strokes, "Thanks again, Anthea. I'll pay you back once we get the loan secured." It wasn't just proof of money. It was proof of my presence. Proof that I wasn't a ghost haunting that house. I was part of its very foundation. A wave of cold clarity rushed over me. I thought of all the little ways she'd rewritten the story over the years. From "thank you" to "you didn't have to." From "we're building this" to "you offered." She'd always had a way of bending truth just enough to make you question your memory. But I remembered. I remembered sitting on the floor with paint swatches while we ate takeout on paper plates. I remembered arguing over backsplash tile and the way she cried in my arms when the loan nearly fell through. None of that made it onto the deed. But it was real. And now she was erasing me not just from that house, but from every chapter we built together. My phone buzzed again. This time I responded, "I will be more than careful." Because I wasn't just mourning betrayal. I was preparing for battle. I slipped the envelope into the inner pocket of my jacket. Then I stepped out of the car. The night air was cool and sharp, like the first breath after a long cry. My boots clicked softly on the pavement as I crossed the road, back toward the house, though not for confrontation. Not yet. The lights were dimmer now. Through the second-story window, I saw Sterling's silhouette pass by, graceful, unaware. Her laughter filtered down faintly, light, rehearsed, the way she always sounded when cameras or guests were near. I stood there for a full minute, watching, not knocking. Not speaking, just watching. Then I turned and walked away. Every step I took back toward my car felt like a decision. I wouldn't beg for recognition anymore. I wouldn't barter for crumbs from a table I helped build. I had evidence, I had my voice, and I had something stronger than revenge. I had truth, the kind that doesn't fit neatly into property lines or party invites, the kind that burns until it's seen. And as I turned onto my street, moonlight guiding me like a silent witness, I whispered to the empty road. She didn't just keep the house, she tried to steal the story. But I'm still here, and this time, I'm writing the ending. By the time the sun came up, I had barely slept. The glow creeping through my blinds painted everything a muted gold, but it didn't soften the churn inside me. I dressed with mechanical precision, sliding my badge into my purse, gathering the handouts I'd printed the week before. This wellness conference had been my project for months. Late nights drafting agendas, coordinating speakers, securing sponsors. It was the kind of work I had once been proud to share with Sterling. Now, the thought of her even knowing about it made my stomach knot. The Savannah Civic Center buzzed with the low hum of conversation when I arrived. Volunteers in matching polos rushed around, taping directional signs to walls. The smell of brewed coffee and warm pastries drifted through the foyer. I stood at the registration table, taking in the banners I had designed, the tables I had arranged, the schedule I had written. This was my work. My name was printed on the program as lead organizer, but after last night, I knew better than to believe words on paper were enough. I took my seat on the panel stage, smoothing my blazer, ready to talk about healthcare equity. As the room filled, I spotted familiar faces from the local hospital system, state representatives, even a senator whose support had been a long shot until I pitched him. The applause rose when the moderator introduced us. My heart beat steady. This was my arena, my safe ground. Then I saw her, Sterling, walking in late, as if summoned by applause, dressed in a cream suit and heels that clicked like a metronome. Her hair gleamed under the overhead lights, her smile rehearsed. She didn't even glance at me as she crossed to the front row, and without asking, sat where the press photographers could get the best angle. She looked like she belonged here, like she had earned it. Halfway through my presentation, the moderator paused to thank the minds behind this conference. Before I could stand, Sterling rose instead, pivoting gracefully toward the audience. "We've been building this initiative for years," she said, her voice carrying easily. "When I first started my wellness outreach, I knew this community deserved more. It's been such a journey, and I'm proud to stand here with our partners today." She gestured toward me vaguely, the way someone might wave toward a catering staff. The crowd clapped. A senator walked over after the session to shake her hand, not mine. I sat frozen, microphone still in hand. Our initiative? My outreach? She had helped design a logo once. She had taken 2 phone calls, posted a single Instagram story. That was it. Yet now she was the founder, the face, the hero. The program brochure even listed her as conference co-founder. I thought of the grant applications I had written at 2 in the morning, of the sponsors I had convinced to stay despite budget cuts. None of that mattered. The narrative belonged to her. During the coffee break, I stepped outside into the courtyard, trying to slow my breathing. Celine followed a few steps behind. She hesitated before approaching, glancing around to make sure no one was close enough to hear. "Anthea," she whispered, "I need to tell you something." I turned, clutching my cup. "What?" "I saw what happened last night," she said softly. "And today, this..." She swallowed hard. I wanted to speak up, but I couldn't. Her eyes darted back toward the building. "Sterling. She told me if I sided with you, she'd pull the funding for my son's tuition. He's only 1 semester away from graduating." Her words landed like a stone dropped into still water. "She threatened you?" I asked quietly. Celine nodded, her eyes glistening. "I'm sorry. I know it's wrong. I know you don't deserve this." I stared at the brick path between us. Part of me wanted to tell her I understood, to ease her guilt. Another part of me wanted to scream. My whole life, silence had been my shield. Stay calm, stay polite, don't give them a reason to call you bitter. And here it was again. Someone else staying silent and me paying the cost. Inside, applause erupted for another speaker. I could hear Sterling's laugh threading through the noise, bright and sharp. My chest tightened. I wasn't angry only at her anymore. I was angry at myself, for believing that patience was a virtue when it had only taught people how to use me, for thinking family loyalty was mutual when it had been one-sided all along. Celine reached out as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back, not cruelly, just enough to make the space mine again. "You don't have to explain," I said evenly. "I get it." "I really do." She lowered her hand, looking down. When I returned to the panel, Sterling was on stage taking a photo with the senator. I walked past without looking at her. For the first time, I felt something break loose inside me. Not despair, but a slow, rising heat. I didn't know yet what I would do with it, but I knew this. Silence hadn't protected me. It had only buried me. If silence was strength, then why did it feel like suffocation? 2 nights passed like a fog rolling through familiar streets. Quiet, slow, dense. I didn't leave the apartment. I didn't answer the phone. I didn't open social media, though the notifications blinked across my lock screen like desperate knocks. I closed the blinds, lit a jasmine candle that sputtered against the stale air, and sat at my kitchen table with a cooling cup of coffee and the truth burning a hole in my laptop. Sterling's voice played again in my headphones, as slick and venomous as I remembered it that afternoon in the Civic Center dressing room. She thinks she can just show up and take credit. Please. I buried her in the background where she belongs. By the time she figures it out, nobody will care. She laughed. That smooth, polished laugh she reserved for interviews and charity luncheons. The kind that made people think she was the charming one. But I knew it was a weapon. And for the first time, I had it on record. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I hit pause, labeled the file clearly. Sterling Confession.mp3. Then I backed it up. 3 copies. Cloud drive. External hard drive. A tiny USB stick that I tucked into a dented metal box filled with old receipts and expired coupons. Paranoia? Maybe. But when someone spent years trying to rewrite your story, you start guarding your chapters. That night, I called Mariah. We'd lost touch after college, but I knew she'd become a lawyer, and more importantly, she had always had a keen sense of justice. She picked up on the second ring. "Anthea?" she said, surprised. "Are you okay?" "No," I said. "But I will be." I told her everything, trying to keep my voice steady, factual. No dramatics, just data. The engagement party, the cut footage, the disappearing credit, and finally the recording. When I finished, she didn't speak for a full 5 seconds. Then, calm as glass, she said, "You're holding dynamite. But don't light it yet." "I don't want to burn the house down," I replied. "I just want my name back." "Good. Then build your foundation. Start collecting everything. Dates, files, contracts. Create a timeline. Keep your emotions out of your documentation. And Anthea? Yeah? When you swing, swing hard. No half measures." I didn't sleep that night, but I didn't need to. My mind had sharpened. My pulse had steadied. I started with a spreadsheet, titling it Project Resurface. I went through years of emails, texts, and archived photos, found an old email chain where Sterling said she'd submit the grant paperwork on both our behalf. Highlighted it. Another thread where she'd referred to me as lead coordinator in the early days. Screenshotted it. Dates, receipts, drafts of speeches where my name had once been listed. Deleted in the final cut. Each document felt like laying a brick, slow and solid, building something I hadn't known I needed. My own narrative. My own defense. 2 days later, the knock on my door came just as I was exporting a new folder of labeled documents. A man in a gray suit stood on the other side of the peephole, holding a crisp envelope. "Ms. Anthea White?" he asked. "Yes." No smile, no explanation. He handed over the envelope and walked away. The letter inside was thick, embossed, and full of pomp. Sterling's attorney, a cease and desist. "You are hereby instructed to refrain from making defamatory statements." It went on, full of legalese and thinly veiled threats. I laughed, low and bitter. So that was her move, a preemptive strike. She knew. The recording had shaken something. I hadn't said a word publicly, but she felt the tremor. I laid the letter flat on the table beside my laptop and read it again under the glow of my desk lamp. The gall. She still thought she could control the story, that she could scare me back into silence. That I was the same girl who used to bite her tongue in meetings, who'd let her take the spotlight because I didn't want to seem difficult. That girl was gone. Later that evening, a message came from Celine. Just her name lighting up the screen made me hesitate. We hadn't spoken much since the fallout at the Civic Center, but the message was short and packed with power. "I found some old files you might need." Sterling forgot I had them. Attached were PDFs, contracts from our sponsors, bearing my signature as the lead coordinator. Not hers. Originals. Untouched. "Thanks," I wrote back. It was all I could manage. The rest of the night, I worked in silence, only the hum of the city outside my window breaking the stillness. I labeled every file, updated the spreadsheet, then added a sticky note to my laptop. Truth, timing. It became my mantra. I wasn't ready to go public. Not yet. This wasn't about vengeance or spectacle. It was about reclaiming what was mine, quietly, precisely, legally. I practiced what I'd say, if the moment ever came. I envisioned sitting across from Sterling, calm, deliberate, watching her squirm under the weight of her own lies. No rage, no tears, just truth, unshakable and well documented. She had underestimated me for years because I didn't shout, because I didn't fight her in public, because I played nice. But the thing about staying quiet is that people forget you have a voice, and when you finally use it, they never see it coming. And this time, the evidence, it wasn't hearsay, it wasn't memory, it wasn't emotion, it was her voice, raw, unedited, and mine to use. The next morning brought a heavy stillness. Clouds hung low, the kind that smothered the sky in gray silence. I sat at the kitchen counter with a half-drunk mug of tea, the steam long faded. Everything felt muted, but my resolve from the night before hadn't gone cold. I whispered the words to myself again. Truth is greater than timing. It wasn't about confrontation anymore. It was about documenting what had always been buried beneath other people's narratives. I played the audio in my head one more time. Sterling's voice, acidic and dismissive, caught in a moment she never intended to be remembered. This wasn't vengeance, it was preservation, a line drawn in ink instead of vanishing pencil. I packed what I needed without overthinking. The envelope from last week, my old leather-bound notebook, and the key I never returned. I parked several houses away from the family home. The neighborhood looked almost identical to the one in my childhood, but quieter now, like it too had aged and grown wary. The house stood the same, 2 stories, tired shutters, a porch sagging under the weight of seasons and silence. Technically, it was Sterling's now, thanks to some underhanded paperwork signed while I was living in another state. But in every detail, every creaking floorboard and sun-faded corner, it still carried my memories. I used the side door. She'd never changed the locks. Maybe she hadn't thought she needed to. Maybe she believed I wouldn't come back. Inside, the air was musty. Not dirty, just stale. Like a place no one really lived in anymore, despite the lights occasionally being on. I moved quietly through the hallways, careful with my steps, the way you are when walking through someone else's museum. I paused outside Mother's old study. The door was locked, same as always. That alone made me feel like a child again. But silence had bought me nothing. I retrieved the small toolkit I brought and popped the latch with a quiet click. Not elegant, but effective. The room looked untouched, a little dustier, a little dimmer, but the same shelf of family albums, the same rug with the wine stain in the corner. I moved toward the desk. The second drawer on the left, the one she used to keep sealed, gave me pause. I opened it slowly. Bills, old receipts, a dried corsage. And then I saw it. A thick envelope, aged and sealed. My name, Anthea, written in her looping script. I sat down on the old velvet couch by the window, hands trembling as I opened it. Her letter wasn't long, but it hit like a wave. To my daughters, if life ever forces you apart, know this. Both of you share in this home. Anthea, your kindness held me up when days were dark. Sterling, hold your head high, but never forget your sister. I meant for you both to hold claim to this place, as comfort and as inheritance. Never let someone edit your story. With all my heart, Mother. I read it once. Then again. I ran my fingers over her words, over the way she shaped the letters, the firmness in her loops. I wasn't imagining it. She had written it plainly. Never let someone edit your story. For the first time in weeks, I felt grounded. As I stood to leave, I caught a glimpse of the old trunk in the corner, the one our housekeeper used to keep spare linens and photo albums in. I opened it on a hunch. Inside, tucked beneath a stack of worn tablecloths and photo envelopes, was a flash drive in a labeled case. Lucasta, it read, in my mother's handwriting. I nearly gasped. She must have hidden this deliberately, maybe even knowing one day it would matter. I took it and slipped out of the house the way I came in, locking the door behind me like nothing had happened. But everything had. Back at my apartment, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. Files appeared, mostly photos, old scanned documents, notes, then a folder labeled Engagement. Inside, just one file, a short video clip. Before I could open it, my phone buzzed. A message from Lucasta. "You need to see this." The same file. She must have known I found the original. I clicked play. Sterling, in her dressing room at the engagement party. The camera angle was discreet, perched in the upper corner. She didn't know it was recording. "I just want to see her walk out crying," she muttered, pacing, tugging at her dress. "She ruins everything just by existing." Behind her, Callista let out a cruel laugh. My chest tightened. It wasn't just what she said, it was how casually she said it, like it was a plan, like this had always been the point. I backed up the clip in every place I could think of, my cloud storage, external drives, even an encrypted file I kept for work emergencies. This wasn't going anywhere. Then I printed the letter. I framed it. I highlighted the key sentences. I started building what I called my truth archive. Emails, financial records, copies of checks she'd guilted me into writing. Every piece of the puzzle I had ignored or filed away to avoid conflict, I pulled them all into the light. Finally, I drafted a message, not to her, but to her lawyer. "I have proof. I have documentation. I am seeking acknowledgement. If I do not receive it, I will make these records public." I didn't send it, not yet. That night, I stood by my window, watching the headlights from passing cars stretch across the walls. For so long, I had been waiting for someone to believe me, to say, "You're right," to validate my pain. But now, I wasn't seeking validation. I was simply holding the raw file. She'd tried to cut me out, to rewrite the story with herself as the only heir. But stories don't die just because you stop telling them. Truth lives in backup drives and old ink. It lives in letters and the curves of a mother's handwriting. I turned off the light, crawled into bed, and exhaled. I wasn't afraid anymore. The morning sun filtered gently through the sheer curtains, casting pale gold across my bedroom walls. I had barely slept. My thoughts had spun relentlessly through the night, turning over every outcome, every possible consequence. But as I sat on the edge of my bed, the folder in my lap, I felt something close to peace. My throat was tight. Not with fear, exactly, but with a kind of restrained courage, the kind you need when you're about to rewrite your own narrative. I dressed deliberately, nothing flashy, just a navy dress and a tan blazer that made me feel anchored. I slid the folder into my shoulder bag and glanced one last time in the mirror. My eyes looked tired, but steady. Today wouldn't be about performance or charm. Today was about truth. The drive to the Savannah History Museum was quiet. The city was stretching awake, the air tinged with wisteria and a trace of salt from the river. I passed families walking hand in hand, children licking dripping ice cream cones, old friends embracing beneath the live oaks. On the surface, it was a perfect spring Saturday. But under it all, I felt a tension, like a tide pulling beneath still water. The event had already begun when I arrived. The museum's brick courtyard buzzed with community energy. Booths lined the perimeter, offering everything from hand-stitched quilts to genealogy pamphlets. A trio of high school students played soft jazz near the entrance. History was everywhere, painted, printed, carved into wood and memory. And yet, as I walked past glass displays of Civil War letters and faded photographs, I couldn't help but think, history isn't just preserved, it's edited, controlled, erased when inconvenient. I found Phaedra near the stage. She was helping a local elder rearrange a table of community wellness brochures. She didn't say much, just looked me over, then gave a small nod. She knew what I was about to do. She didn't try to stop me. At 11 o'clock sharp, I was introduced as a local advocate for equitable health and heritage access. I took the stage to polite applause, my heels clicking on the wooden platform. The mic wobbled when I adjusted it, and for a second, I heard my own breath echoing across the courtyard. I began with neutral ground, talking about the need for preserving all histories, for making healthcare available to every zip code, not just the wealthy ones. People nodded, smiled, but about 10 minutes in, I paused. My hand brushed the envelope inside my jacket pocket. I could feel the edges, still sharp. I took a breath, pulled it out, and held it up. "This letter," I said, "was never meant to see the light of day. It was written by my mother, hidden from both me and my sister for years. But it holds a truth I believe matters to all of us here. I unfolded the paper, careful not to let my voice waver, and read the line that had haunted me most. Both of you share claim to this home. Never let anyone rewrite what you know to be true. A quiet ripple moved through the crowd. Some tilted their heads, others froze. I tapped a button on the remote and turned to the screen behind me. A grainy video began to play. Sterling's voice, off-camera, calm, and calculated. Callista's laugh, unmistakable. The words weren't explosive, but the implications were. The audience didn't need me to explain it. They knew Sterling. They knew her polished smile and perfect public image. And now, they were seeing a side that had been kept behind velvet ropes and curated press. Gasps. Whispers. A man in the back whispered, "Is that real?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. A QR code flashed on the screen, linking to a shared drive with the full evidence, copies of the letter, affidavits, transcripts. I'd uploaded it that morning. No redactions, no edits, just the raw, unfiltered truth. Phones came out. People scanned, brows furrowed. No one moved. Even the kids stopped running for a minute. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. Savannah was a town where whispers moved faster than wind. The moment the video ended, the air felt charged, like lightning waiting to strike. Phaedra stood off to the side, arms crossed, face unreadable. But her presence gave me strength. She wasn't standing behind me to shield me. She was standing beside me to witness. Within minutes, my phone began buzzing. First a text from a reporter I barely knew. Then another, from someone on the Heritage Board. Then 3 emails. The dominoes were falling. I glanced at the event listing on my phone. The S. White Foundation logo was already gone from the sponsor page. So just like that, her presence had begun to vanish, not with a bang, but with the cold swipe of deletion. Sterling wasn't there. I suspected she'd chosen to skip the event, thinking herself above it. That was her mistake, because by the time she saw what I had shared, it would already be too late. I finished my remarks quietly. No soaring end, no dramatic flair, just the truth, placed into the hands of whoever wanted it. When I stepped down from the podium, there was no applause, only silence. And in that silence, I felt something remarkable. Freedom. I didn't wait around. I walked past the crowd, past the quilted booths and the curious stares, toward the exit. Someone called my name. I didn't turn. Phaedra caught up with me by the gates. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes met mine with something close to pride. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Whatever's next," I replied. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't spectacle. It was reclamation. For every time I'd been told to stay quiet, to be respectable, to not stir the waters, I had finally spoken. I didn't shout. The truth did that for me. The sky hung low and heavy. The morning I stepped into Harper's Cafe, gray light filtering through the wide front windows like it had been strained through sorrow. Outside, the street hummed with quiet tension. News vans lined the curb, cameras sleeping atop tripods, waiting for something worth pointing at again. Their satellite dishes tilted upward like flower petals opening to scandal, trying to catch every echo of what had unraveled over the past week. I picked a corner seat near the back wall, halfway between the exit and the windows, not quite hiding, but not exactly present either. The menu was the same as always, but everything else felt permanently altered. I ordered black coffee and oatmeal, something grounding, something warm. As I waited, I watched life flicker by. A father with a toddler on his shoulders, a woman jogging past with a red scarf trailing like a comet, a man unloading bakery goods from a van. Life didn't stop just because mine had cracked. That was the cruel brilliance of it. Normalcy went on performing its quiet ballet while I was still catching my breath backstage. My phone buzzed on the table beside my spoon. A notification lit the screen. Savannah Foundation cuts ties with Sterling White. I didn't smile with triumph. It wasn't joy, not really. but I did feel the quiet, steady hum of justice finally finding its footing. That foundation had once praised her as a visionary in wellness. Now their website barely mentioned her name. My heart didn't race, but it did steady. Another message. Sterling White cancels last-minute interview appearance. The unraveling wasn't mine anymore. It was hers. When the waitress set down my coffee, I nodded in thanks, letting the warmth of the cup calm my fingers. I stirred slowly, watching the cream make lazy swirls across the surface. Across the cafe, a man stared. Maybe a reporter, maybe just curious. I didn't flinch. I didn't nod. Sometimes the truest form of strength is letting them wonder while you say nothing. By noon, my phone rang again. My attorney. Her voice was tight but controlled. She's requesting a joint interview, a public one. Says it's a chance to set the record straight together. I let that hang between us like fog. Of course she wanted a stage. She always had. A reconciliation, you mean? I asked, my tone flat. She's calling it a healing opportunity, my lawyer clarified. A filmed conversation, professionally produced, neutral moderator. Her team says it could restore mutual dignity. I laughed once, quietly. Mutual dignity had left the room years ago. I'm not interested in stagecraft, I said. She's welcome to make amends, but it won't be in front of a camera. If she wants to talk, she can reach out like a human being, not a PR brand. There was silence on the other end, then a sigh. Understood. I'll put that in writing. I ended the call and sat with the stillness. That had been her last card, the big, polished olive branch, offered not from humility, but from desperation. When the cameras weren't rolling in her direction anymore, she finally thought to invite me onto the stage. I didn't want her stage. I never had. That evening, I drafted a brief statement with my attorney. It was just 2 paragraphs. There will be no shared platform, no joint interview, and no further public comment beyond this statement. I step forward in truth. I choose to walk away from conditional acceptance, from orchestrated reconciliation, from silence demanded by others. I am not here to relive pain for an audience. I do not need applause to validate my survival. I am not reclaiming space. I'm building my own. I hit send. Then I opened my social media apps, each one, and removed every trace of her name, unfollowed, untagged, unlinked. It wasn't petty. It was protection. It wasn't erasure. It was clarity. For years, I'd lived in the corners of her spotlight, bent into whatever shape the family needed me to be, but this time, I wouldn't negotiate my peace. At dusk, I drove to the cemetery on the edge of the city, the one where magnolias lined the narrow path like sentinels. Spring was teasing the trees early that year. Petals had begun to fall like soft reminders that things bloom even after harsh seasons. I parked and walked the rest of the way to my mother's grave, a folded document in my hand, the restored will, not the forged version, not the edited one Sterling had tried to slip past the courts. This was the truth, intact. I laid it gently at the base of the headstone and crouched low. I know you tried, I whispered, and I know it wasn't always enough. I didn't cry, but something swelled up behind my ribs like a tide held back by sheer will. My mother had been silenced by illness, then rewritten by family ambition. But here, on this quiet patch of grass, I honored her honestly. I stood slowly, brushing damp grass from my knees. The wind stirred again, lifting my coat edges like wings. I looked toward the horizon, not for meaning, not for signs, just for space. The space I'd finally given myself. Letting go isn't always soft. Sometimes it's loud. Sometimes it rattles foundations and redraws family trees, but it is always necessary. And this time, I wasn't letting go quietly. I was choosing myself, without apology, without negotiation, without performance. Morning sunlight spilled through the narrow blinds in my small coastal office, striping the desk in golden lines. I had chosen this place for the quiet, for the way the ocean air reached through the cracked windows and whispered of survival. The salt and oak carried a scent that felt like renewal. Weeks had passed since everything changed, since the confrontation, the restored will, and the shattering of what once held me hostage in silence. The fallout had landed like a storm, sweeping through names and titles, erasing some, rewriting others. The will, my mother's real will, sat in a slim folder at the corner of my desk. I had reread it many times, not because I doubted its authenticity, but because I still found it hard to believe that someone had finally spoken in my defense, even after death. In her unmistakable handwriting were the words that undid years of exclusion. She had named me. She had chosen me. I opened my laptop, watching the nonprofit dashboard load. Numbers, volunteer schedules, new donations. Every click reminded me of how far I'd come from the girl who once sat outside closed doors, waiting for scraps of approval. Now, women wrote to thank us. One had found stable housing after years of fleeing. Another had returned to school, inspired by one of our workshops. These weren't just metrics. They were echoes of something real, something built from the very cracks people once told me to hide. The office was modest, just a few rooms and wide windows, but it felt sacred. There was a new potted plant on the sill, one a client had gifted. Its pale green leaves leaned toward the sun, unbothered by shadows. I leaned back in my chair and listened. The world was still. No shouting, no courtroom, just me and my own breath. Sterling's name had begun to vanish from things. Her investments were unraveling, partners pulled out quietly, like embarrassed guests sneaking away from a party they once bragged about. White Foundation no longer appeared in art catalogs or fundraisers. Some whispered that she had left town. Others said she was holed up in her lake house, trying to salvage what remained. People asked if I knew where she'd gone. I didn't. I didn't need to. She no longer shaped the edges of my world. One evening, I opened the wooden box I had kept for years under my bed. Inside were letters, some written on wrinkled hotel stationery, others scribbled in journals I never finished. Most were never meant to be read by anyone but me. There were notes to my mother, to Sterling, to myself, versions of conversations that never happened. I had written them in moments when I didn't have a voice, when the only safe place to speak was on paper. I picked one up, an old draft of a letter to Sterling. I had written it when I still believed we could fix what was broken. The lines were jagged, desperate, apologizing for things I didn't do, asking for peace she never intended to give. I placed it gently on the firewood in the office lounge and struck a match. One by one, I burned them all. Each letter hissed and curled, the smoke carrying years of guilt into the rafters. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. Letting go doesn't always sound like sobbing. It can be the quietest release in the world. And that night, as the ashes settled, I felt something inside loosen. Not forgiveness, maybe, but freedom. Later, I stepped out onto the narrow balcony. The street below was nearly silent, the shops darkened, porch lights flickering like distant lighthouses. Above me, the clouds rolled low and slow, blushing with twilight. I repeated something my mother used to say when I'd come home with hurt feelings and bitten lips. Peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the presence of your own voice. For too long, I had lived in other people's stories. I let them tell me who I was, what I owed, how small I should stay. Now, in the hush of dusk, I simply stood in my skin. My story was mine. I didn't have to shout it. I only had to live it. A few nights later, I drove past Sterling's old estate. The lights were off, the shutters drawn. It looked like a place abandoned by truth. Once, that house had loomed over me like a verdict. Now, it was just bricks and dust. I didn't stop. I just let the car roll by, windows down, music playing softly, a song from childhood, back when things felt simpler. My fingers tapped the steering wheel, and somewhere between one verse and the next, I smiled. I made one final stop that evening, my mother's grave. The cemetery was nearly empty, save for the wind teasing the trees. I knelt and placed a single white camellia by her stone, brushing away a fallen leaf. "I'm okay," I whispered. "You were right all along. I should have never let them rewrite me." I sat there for a while, letting the silence speak. I didn't need a crowd to witness my healing. There was no applause, no neat ribbon to tie it all up. Just moonlight between the branches and the hum of my own steady breath. I stood, pulled my jacket tighter, and began the walk back to the car. Each step forward felt earned. The path wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I was no longer walking to prove anything. I was walking simply because I could. Because I am not broken, I'm just no longer swallowing the stories other people wrote for me. Sometimes, the people we call family are the ones who teach us the most painful lessons and the most powerful ones. This wasn't just a story about betrayal, it was about reclaiming identity, learning the value of silence, and finding peace on your own terms. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you thought would always stand by you? Share your story in the comments. I know I'm not alone in this. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more true family stories that speak to the strength it takes to heal.